Imagine waking up tomorrow to a world where half your city is suddenly empty. Doors are locked, breakfast is still warm on the table, but the streets are entirely silent. This isn't a post-apocalyptic fiction movie. This was the terrifying, inescapable reality for millions of people across human history, when an invisible enemy arrived without warning. Long before modern hospitals, microscopes, or synthetic medicine, humanity faced microscopic killers that wiped out entire civilizations in a matter of weeks. And yet, every single one of us is here today because our ancestors figured out how to survive. How did they do it without a single laboratory? The answer will change how you look at history forever. Human disease and population-level sickness have been happening for hundreds of thousands of years, longer than modern epidemiology, germ theory, and pharmaceutical laboratories have existed. This is worth sitting with. The human species became the human species, spread across every continent, built the first civilizations, invented writing, mathematics, philosophy, and global trade routes, long before anyone developed the concept of a dedicated medical laboratory where pathogens could be isolated under clinical microscopes. Every society that ever lived before the 19th century dealt with sweeping contagions without the specific combination of synthetic antibiotics, monoclonal antibodies, viral sequencing, and mass-produced vaccines that characterize modern public health. And the species survived. More than survived, it grew, expanded, and thrived to the point of producing 8 billion people, which suggests that the pre-modern immune and social containment system was working well enough to sustain population growth across the entire span of human prehistory and history until very recently. The question is how? And the answer involves ancient quarantine protocols that were considerably more sophisticated than most people realize. Historical immune adaptations driven by major evolutionary bottlenecks. Herbal and mineral pharmacology that targeted symptoms and secondary infections long before synthetic drugs. A social role dedicated to the isolation and care of the sick that existed in virtually every culture. And some very interesting comparisons between ancient pathogen impacts and modern ones that complicate the simple narrative of medical progress. Let's go through it properly. Start with the biology, because understanding why human disease is as complex as it is provides essential context for everything that follows. Human susceptibility to epidemics is an unintended consequence of a massive evolutionary turning point: the agricultural revolution. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in small, highly mobile hunter-gatherer bands of 20 to 50 people. In a small, isolated group, a lethal pathogen like measles, smallpox, or influenza faces an evolutionary dead end. If a virus kills or immunizes everyone in a band of 30 people within 2 weeks, the virus runs out of new hosts and dies out completely. For most of human prehistory, crowd diseases could not exist because the human population density was too low to support them. Everything changed when humans settled down. The transition to agriculture, animal domestication, and permanent settlements created dense, sedentary populations living in close proximity to livestock. Pigs, cattle, and poultry shared living spaces with humans, creating an unprecedented ecological bridge for zoonotic diseases, pathogens jumping from animals to humans. Suddenly, human settlements became incubation hubs. A virus or bacterium could circulate indefinitely through a large, interconnected population without running out of hosts. This evolutionary shift created a brutal filtering process. Epidemics that swept through early urban centers in Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and ancient China acted as merciless genetic bottlenecks. Individuals with genetic variations that conferred natural resistance survived and passed those traits to their children. Those without succumbed. The modern human immune system is, in a very real sense, a monument to survival. Every living person today is the direct descendant of ancestors who successfully weathered thousands of years of epidemic trial by fire. Now, let's talk about ancient containment and quarantine protocols, because this is the dimension of epidemic history that modern accounts most often reduce to a simple observation that ancient people were helpless victims of superstition, who blamed disease entirely on divine wrath. This reduction significantly underestimates what traditional societies actually did in practice. Long before anyone understood germ theory or viruses, ancient cultures observed a fundamental empirical truth. Disease could be transmitted from person to person, and they acted on that observation. In ancient civilizations across the globe, from biblical quarantine laws regarding leprosy to the portside isolation practices of medieval Mediterranean trading cities, the principle of spatial separation was recognized as the single most effective defense against a spreading contagion. When an outbreak occurred, communities instituted strict boundaries. Ships suspected of carrying plague were forced to wait offshore for a set period. The origin of the word quarantine, derived from the Venetian term for 40 days. Villages sealed their borders, burning contaminated bedding and isolating the sick in designated pest houses or peripheral camps. While they did not know about microorganisms, they knew about contagion vectors. They tracked patterns of sickness across trade routes and enacted public health ordinances that mirrors modern isolation procedures in everything except the underlying vocabulary. Pain management and symptomatic care during ancient epidemics also deserve attention, because traditional healers did not simply watch patients suffer. During massive outbreaks of respiratory or enteric illness, survival often depended on keeping the patient hydrated, managing severe fevers, and preventing secondary bacterial infections that typically finished off a virus-weakened body. Traditional pharmacopoeias across cultures utilized specific botanical preparations to manage symptoms. Willow bark was deployed for fevers and inflammation. Honey, antimicrobial resins, and specific herbal infusions were used to soothe inflamed respiratory tracts and support hydration. The pharmaceutical toolkit was limited compared to modern intensive care units, but it was deployed within a social and communal environment that maintained basic life support, food distribution, and care for the vulnerable, even when entire households fell ill. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus, an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. This brings us to the social architecture of epidemic response. An epidemic is never just a biological crisis. It is a profound social stress test. In most documented historical cultures, surviving a plague required unprecedented levels of community organization. When the able-bodied fell sick, who tended the fields? Who buried the dead safely? Who prepared food and distributed water? Ancient societies developed specialized mutual aid networks, burial guilds, and community response protocols. In many traditions, religious or civic institutions mobilized volunteers to care for the sick, treating it as an absolute moral and social imperative, despite the personal risk of infection. This social infrastructure served multiple functions simultaneously: the practical function of physical survival support, the psychological function of maintaining social cohesion and preventing total panic, and the adaptive function of preserving community memory regarding which containment strategies worked and which failed. The transmission of this epidemic wisdom happened through oral history, legal codes, and municipal ordinances. If a particular city or tribe survived a plague wave by enforcing strict water boiling, corpse burning, or isolation rules, those practices were codified into cultural traditions. They became hygienic rituals that ensured community survival across generations without requiring formal scientific laboratories. Now, let's talk about the true scale of historical mortality and where modern medicine provided a genuine revolution. Because any honest account of epidemic history has to acknowledge where pre-modern methods fell short. Epidemics in the ancient and medieval world were catastrophic events by measures that are stark and unambiguous. The Antonine Plague, the Plague of Justinian, and the Black Death wiped out massive fractions of regional populations, in some cases killing 30 to 50% of a city or nation within months. Modern public health, sanitation infrastructure, and vaccines have reduced the mortality rate of classic historical scourges to near zero in high-resource settings. Smallpox has been eradicated entirely. This is one of the most dramatic achievements in human history, and it is not diminished by an appreciation of what ancient societies accomplished with primitive tools.
What pre-modern containment achieved was not perfection. It was the survival of the human species through waves of pathogens that could easily have wiped us out entirely. Populations rebounded, adapted, and built resilience through genetic selection and social discipline. Modern epidemiology did not replace total ignorance with knowledge. It replaced an empirical, trial-and-error containment system with a precision-engineered one. A system that added germ theory, viral sequencing, antibiotics, and synthetic vaccines to the behavioral foundation that ancient societies built over millennia. Some of what modern society has done, however, has created new vulnerabilities. Our hyper-connected global travel networks mean a localized outbreak can transform into a global pandemic within weeks, a speed of transmission that ancient pathogens could never achieve. The modern reliance on centralized pharmaceutical supply chains can also create fragility when those systems are strained. The community that faced a plague thousands of years ago, barricading its gates, relying on herbal remedies, and enforcing strict isolation protocols, was not living in a helpless void. They were navigating a biological war zone, using a system built by accumulated human intelligence applied to the oldest threat in evolutionary history. It worked, not perfectly, but well enough to keep humanity in the game. And modern epidemiology at its best is the continuation and expansion of that same fundamental project, protecting the human community from the invisible threats of the natural world. That project is hundreds of thousands of years old. The viral laboratory
is a very recent addition.